Hello and welcome to the SMART Recovery Podcast, your audio headquarters for inspiring and insightful discussions on the topic of addiction recovery. What you'll hear with us will be self-empowering, science-based, and stigma-free. We believe you have the power within yourself to make changes that will move you toward a more satisfying life. And we hope these messages and interviews with leading addiction experts and advocates will help you believe that too. Remember that the purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care from a doctor or other qualified medical professionals. Before making any changes in your treatment plan, please discuss your thoughts with your medical provider.
Welcome to the SMART Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Frazier. Today's guest is SMART facilitator Pete Finger from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. In this podcast, we're going to explore Pete's personal journey of recovery, what it has been like to be a SMART facilitator, and how he is involved in the court system as part of his work with SMART. Pete, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I first wanted to, probably you've been interviewed before, and maybe this is typical where people start, but I think it is a good place to start. Tell me a little bit about your personal journey into trouble, addiction, and then eventually rising from that position.
Sure. My journey started with when I grew up, now in retrospect, I realize I had a lot of trauma in my past. There was abuse in our household. We grew up in a house with a lot of workaholism. I was pretty much abandoned because my parents had their own business and they were rarely ever home. And so it kind of set me up. Alcohol, back in the days of like Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald, when, everybody did smoking and drinking to kind of cope and party. And it was kind of a way that everybody coped with everything. So
it was glamorous. I mean, I found it glamorous myself.
Yeah, I did too. And, and I kind of fell into that whole thing of thinking like parties and alcohol were a way to cope with life's difficulties. But it kind of overtook me because I never really resolved my trauma. And because there was sexual abuse, there was emotional abuse, and then because my parents weren't there, I really didn't know how to deal with a lot of these things. And so I just used alcohol. And then I got into a position where I was doing international travel. I traveled to almost 100 countries, and I would be lonely overseas, so I would just start drinking. And it seemed to be doable for a while. But then when I was transferred back to the United States, then my boss soon found out that the drinking was really out of control, and I had an intervention. So that's kind of where the rubber hit the road.
Yeah. I was curious when you said about abandonment and workaholism. In this country, that's almost celebrated. So I'm sure, or I imagine your parents were given a lot of positive feedback from others and from society, if you will, for running their business and being workaholics. I'm not sure we talked about it in those terms, but for you, it meant abandonment. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, my parents, I think I was talking to one of my friends. I've known her since I was in kindergarten. And she said, yeah, our family was kind of held up as kind of the gold standard in our town because my dad took this business. He moved from New York City out to South Dakota, if you can believe that, town of 2,000 people. And what a change. But, so we were kind of ostracized in a way of the kind of weirdos from the East Coast. Instead of poker, we played bridge. Instead of beer, we drank martinis. Instead of eating at 5, we ate at 8 o'clock at night. So we were kind of the weirdos in town. And, and the other part is that I grew up gay. So I was kind of like triply ostracized in our little town. So, but anyway, yeah, our family was kind of set up as like this, like, oh my gosh, the Fingers and such and such and had money and travel all over. But I don't think anyone realized that my parents were, I mean, my mom was working, I think 18 hours a day, 16 to 18 hours a day. And then my dad was working probably 12 to 14. My dad was also a rager. He had a heck of a temper, never really knew how to deal with conflict. So he would kind of agree, passive, 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 then he would blow up. And you just never knew when he was going to blow.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like walking on eggshells all the time. And so when they weren't there, we were lonely. And when they were there, we were kind of nervous all the time. So both my siblings and I grew up with a tremendous amount of anxiety. And now we've all been through therapy. We've all been through kind of like recovery and, trying to kind of heal that kind of stuff,
Right.
with a better understanding. But we were held up as, this family that's amazing.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people saw money, but it was corporate money. It wasn't really our personal money.
Yeah.
And I don't think they ever saw the difficulties that happened inside.
Yeah. Well, that is part of how we end up, and I'm including myself in my personal journey to recovery, is that anxiety, that failure to sense that we're fitting in, the things that are different under the surface than people might perceive them. So that's certainly something that really has drawn or pushed a lot of people toward addiction in all sorts of ways. But how did you find SMART Recovery, and what was its initial appeal?
Well, I had been through 12-step before for some other things I worked with, like adult children of alcoholics, codependents, and things like that. I'd never really been in trouble drinking, but my drinking did accelerate. And so when I got intervention, I knew I didn't want to go back into 12-step because I belong to a spiritual community. In fact, I was a spiritual leader of a church for a while. And we believe strongly in affirmations and self-talk and things like that. So the part of the 12-step I didn't agree with was continually saying, hi, I'm Pete and I'm an alcoholic, because I felt like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and I didn't want to make it more and more true. So for me, when I chose a place, when I was intervention, I chose a place out in California. It was a Practical Recovery. Tom Horvath, he's the founder of SMART Recovery. So I went there and I absolutely loved it. And then we went to SMART meetings, 2 or 3 times a week. And that was my intro to SMART. I didn't really think the SMART meetings were anything, miraculous. I mean, the treatment was amazing. But after I left, then the meetings became more and more important to me. And so, but I guess I can want me to just keep going on with this story?
Yeah, I mean, it is exactly what I think people need to hear, is that there was, and especially as you just said, Pete, the initial appeal, I mean, you thought it was helpful, or you may have thought it was a good idea, but did it take a little while to understand that this really was a deep and going to be a lasting help to you?
Yeah, because when I first went to the SMART meetings, they were so big. Pretty much what we did is just we went around the room and it was a big sharing. We didn't necessarily work on a specific tool. Sometimes we did, but sometimes the meetings were so big it was just almost impossible to do that. And so I didn't really realize the depth of the program until later. So I eventually came back to South Dakota through a circuitous route. And one of the other things I really had to work on was my mental health issues, because I have ongoing anxiety and depression, which is kind of inherited from my dad's side of the family. And so until I kind of got that under control, it was really hard to deal with the drinking. The co-occurring, I really had to deal with both of those at the same time. And there's a doctor that I went to up in Minneapolis. He's been written up in the Atlantic and a number of different places. He's been on 60 Minutes. His name is Dr. Mark Willenbring from the Alltyr Clinic, and he helped me as much as SMART did in the very beginning. It was the first time that I felt like I had relief from the anxiety and the depression, and things started really, really coming together. It's kind of like the first time when I pulled the SMART Recovery and Dr. Willenbring's work with me together, it was the first time I really felt peace, possibly in my entire life.
So that was, yeah. So that was part of how you, in your personal journey to recovery, what had to also happen besides addressing the alcohol addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so you're more deeply involved with SMART at that point. When did you decide you wanted to be a facilitator and actually help others put the practical tools and principles, science-based principles behind as part of their recovery?
Well, when I came back to South Dakota, and I started attending the meetings, I just decided I did not want to drink anymore, and I needed to it's kind of like all hands on deck. And at that time, I wasn't working, and so because I actually couldn't, I don't know if I talked about this part. I didn't work for about a year because my anxiety was so high, and so I had to go through some really, really deep therapy during that time. And when I did that, we uncovered a lot of the anxiety that I felt in my life came from being sexually abused by a teacher when I was in school. So, so during that time, that's when I decided to take the training, because I didn't want to revert. If the anxiety came back, I didn't want to start drinking as a way to deal with the anxiety. And so I said, I'm just going to go through the training. I didn't really decide I wanted to be a facilitator. I just wanted to really, really get as much as I could and understand SMART as much as I could. And after I took the training, I never drank again. That's all I can say. And that's one of the reasons I tell people in my meetings. I said, if you really want to get this stuff, go through the training, even if you don't want to become a facilitator, because it'll really embed it into your mind. So that's what I did. And then the regular facilitator would ask me if I would facilitate, and I did, and I got some really positive feedback, because I used to be a trainer when I was in corporate. So I was used to speaking in front of groups, doing presentations and things like that. And soon after that, the guy asked if I wanted to start leading the meeting, and he was going to be off to do new things. And so before I knew it, I was in charge of the Sioux Falls meeting, which is the main meeting in our state, probably. And from there, then what I did is I started contacting the other people in the state, seeing what they were doing. And I think I contacted SMART to ask them, because I thought I was already the regional coordinator, but I wasn't. But I actually was, but just not in name. And so I worked with Christy and Kevin Minnick, and then so they made me regional coordinator, which really wasn't a big change.
Yeah, well, that's great advice, though, to step back for a moment, that if people want to understand and really deepen their knowledge and connection to SMART, they can take training, whether or not that results in them being an official facilitator. I imagine it helps when they're in a group, even as a participant, to understand more of the things that are going on a little bit, as part of the dynamics of SMART. So that's great advice, Pete. Thank you for that. Let's now shift gears and go into, besides that facilitation, you are also heavily involved in the drug courts in South Dakota. Talk about first what the drug courts are and how you got involved with them.
Well, I went to a breakout group when I went to the last conference, and it was on courts and corrections. And I have 4 DUIs myself. So I've had my share of time in jail, and which was harrowing for me. And so I have kind of a soft spot in my heart for people who are incarcerated and that want to find a different way, want to find something positive that they can grasp. And so I went, and Joe Gerstein was in there, and Charles True and Ron Lott, who wrote the Successful Life Skills book, which I just absolutely love. And so what I wanted to enhance our meetings, because you probably know the Minnesota model, which is 12-step, and we're kind of like a mini Minneapolis here. We're a small version of Minneapolis. Sioux Falls is, we're very connected to there. And so Minneapolis is very, very 12-step oriented, and Sioux Falls is too. So I was trying to figure out how we could expand SMART recovery. And so I decided to from the information that I got from that breakout group, to start going into the courts and start knowing the judges and start finding out who the court services officers are and things like that. So what I did is I found out who the coordinator was, or the director of our drug court for the whole state, and I just called her up and asked her if we could have lunch. Now that's because we live in a state with under 1 million people. It's really easy to, it's a small community, so you can kind of call anybody here, and most people in South Dakota are pretty darn nice. So
that Midwest, I love that. It's true, the Midwest niceness, but you know, you still were doing a lot of research. I mean, sure, you had access to these decision makers, but anyone out there, whether they're in California or New York or South Dakota or Idaho, it does take research like you did to understand the courts a little bit. But how was that lunch? First of all, where did you eat lunch, and how was it?
Oh, let's see. So I went up to Pierre, not Pierre, and so Noreen and I had lunch, and she was so excited to meet me because she had just gone to a class about evidence-based practices, and they were talking about SMART recovery. And then a day or two later, I called her, and so we actually went to lunch, and I think we talked for like 2.5 hours and started talking about how we could start getting into the courts, you know, and she would do whatever she could to support me. And so what we decided to do was launch it slowly, and not kind of do a huge thing in the whole state. So we took a couple of her, you know, there are all these different, I guess, regions. I think there's 7 or 9 regions in South Dakota. Each one has a coordinator at the top, and then they have, they're called CSOs. Those are court services officers. Those are kind of like the probation officers that oversee the people in the drug court, make sure that they don't drink, and they meet with them, I think, on a weekly basis. And then in addition to that, you have mental health people also assisting. These people also have a number of different classes they have to do. The drug court program is not for the weak of heart. As many people say, it's much easier to go to jail. Now, I think you have to have a felony for drinking or drugs to be in either the DUI or the drug court. And so these people are habitual users. And so what they're trying to do is trying to find a new path rather than just incarcerate them, not deal with the underlying trauma, not dealing with everything they're dealing with, and then have these people go out into the community and then start drinking again. So generally the program lasts between 16 to 24 months, and where they go through this, it's really kind of a brainwashing, where they talk about, you know, criminal thinking, they talk about why they make decisions they did. And of course, a lot of the people, myself included, we were never taught really good life skills by our parents. We were never taught what to do when we get really angry. Anger wasn't tolerated in our house, you know, except by my dad. And so you grow up feeling anxious or scared or whatever, or you have trauma, and no one kind of tells you, well, how do I process this? What do I do? You know, and so a lot of what we're trying to do is teach them life skills. What do I do when I'm upset? What are my thoughts about this? And so we try to correct a lot of irrational thinking, or what I call unhelpful thinking.
Right. And of course, these are the principles found throughout the SMART program, the 4-point program that we can get into in a minute. And it's
correct.
And it's something that, you know, you're describing, I think, what would be called cognitive behavioral therapy, where you are looking at those thoughts. And SMART is based on that, evidence-based, that if you start questioning these thoughts, good things can happen, or less bad things can happen, if you will.
Exactly. And so I started attending drug court myself just to kind of see what was happening. And it really touched my heart of seeing, people would get applause for, however many days, and they would get incentives. Now it depended on the judge. It depends a lot on the judge and on I'm going to call him the CSO, the court services officer, who oversees a particular person, because each person needs to go in front of the judge either every week or every other week, depending on how far they are, what phase that they're in. I believe there are 5 phases of drug court, and each time, and then you phase up. You have to kind of apply to phase up. It's kind of like going to the next grade, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior kind of thing. And then you graduate and you're all done. But so what I liked about drug court is that it's evidence-based, or it's supposed to be evidence-based, and just like SMART is. And I really like that. And Noreen and I talked a lot about that. And in fact, in South Dakota, they're putting a new management information system in so that they can track, how much they're following the evidence, and if things are working, if they're not working. So one of the things that Noreen and I talked about, and she told me that for every sanction or negative thing that the court does, there should be 3 positives. Okay. And that's one thing I often don't see. I don't see the kudos that are given to people. In fact, I had someone in my group that said in 2 years that they never got one positive thing said to them by their CSO. And so those are things that, concern me a little bit, because a lot of the damage that happened to all the people, I believe, or almost all the people who have trauma, who have addictions, is that our parents, all they did was tell us everything we did wrong. They were so stressed out, and I know that they did the best that they could, but a lot of them didn't. They really didn't give us very much positive feedback. And so a lot of the people, I believe, that are in this program, they're searching for new role models. They're searching for acceptance. They're searching for anything positive. And so when people keep coming down on them again and again and again, all it does is re-traumatize them. And so
and reinforces that way of thinking, that way of negative thinking that leads to negative behaviors.
Right, exactly. So I find it not very helpful. I mean, I think even if people take a small step on something positive, that they need to feel reinforcement. They need to feel like there's somebody really on my side here. There's somebody who's going to accept me unconditionally. And it's not going to be that conditional love like when I was growing up, that my dad would like me if I did something right. And if I didn't, I either got beaten, yelled at, or he acted like he, wanted to disown me or something. And so now with that said, I believe that there's some drug courts that just do absolutely amazing things. And I also believe it's the best thing that we have right now. Is it perfect? No. But I do believe that it's good. I do believe that it's really helping a lot of people. I've seen people shift their thinking in amazing ways in, under a year, sometimes just a few months.
Yeah. So is that where SMART really helps in the drug courts, that it is also evidence-based, it is also, addresses thinking and negative thinking? Is that why SMART is a good fit in the drug courts?
Yes, because they're both evidence-based. So just like we say in our meetings, we say because SMART is based on science, unlike AA. Now, I'm not saying AA is totally, out there, but I'm saying it was created back in the 30s by Dr. Bob and Bill, and it's remained pretty much the same. And so when new things occur in science, then SMART will change because it's based on science. And it will change and it will morph, because as they learn about brain plasticity, or they learn about trauma, they learn about, like some of the books that I find really helpful, like The Body Keeps the Score and things like that. Those all help us to understand the brain better and how addiction works. And so SMART will keep changing. In the same way, the drug courts will still continue to change as well, because those are evidence-based too. And I think it's just going to take a while to because drug courts are pretty new. They haven't been around that long. And so I think it's kind of like when we started our program, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. Well, now we feel fairly solid about it. And I think also in drug courts, that's the same situation. Now, one of the things I also did is I went to a one-day training on how drug courts work to really understand not just how they work day to day, but like the philosophy underneath it and what people are really trying to accomplish. And that really helped me a lot. And so, and I believe they're free, and they're held all over the United States. And so if anyone's interested in drug courts, I think you just go to, I can't remember the organization. I think it's the National Association of Drug Courts. And they have a number of different classes you can do either online or in person. So
I think we'll try to find that exact link or information and put it in the description of this podcast, because that sounds like a great place to get more information and understand how it helps as an alternative to simply locking someone up and saying, good luck, and I hope you don't end up back here, which is certainly not going to help the majority of people. But so there you are with your smart heart, if you will, trying to be a part of a court system that is developing and evolving. And that's a wonderful thing. I mean, what else can people learn about in the courts and how they're dealing with people and using smart recovery?
Well, I would say that one of the things that I'm the most excited about is the book by Ron Lott and Charles True, which is called Successful Life Skills. And this book is kind of like the Smart Recovery book, but it's broken down into these small segments. And they're just, and you actually don't even need to be a facilitator to run one of these meetings. All you need to do is read the book and answer the questions as a group. And I have seen people, oh my gosh, in under 6 weeks, totally change their thinking, totally change it. The way that I run my groups is, like I said, we just kind of created this thing. We didn't have any kind of template from anybody. And so I hold 2 Zoom groups a week throughout the state of South Dakota. These are people who are already in drug court and they need more meetings, or they didn't like AA, or they're just looking for something new. And so I have people all across the state that probably don't know each other until we get into the class together. It's an hour and a half meeting, which most SMART meetings are. We spend the first 45 minutes of how was everybody's week going, and somebody might say, I'm really dealing with this. My relationship with my girlfriend is really difficult or whatever. And then I'll ask anybody else, has anybody else gone through this before? What did you do? So it's kind of a community building thing. And I tell people that we don't criticize each other. We don't tell each other what to do. We don't shame each other.
Mm-hmm.
But, but what we try to do is like, here's what helped me. And so I find that as helpful as the actual the actual learning in the book.
Right.
So we spend about half the time on that, and then the other half the time we spend going through our book. And so I broke it down into about 30 lessons. So 1 lesson a week. So it takes, a little over a half a year to get through it. And then what I do is when we get to the end of the book, and somebody has gone through, they finished all their assignments, then I will go into the court, present them with a certificate in front of the judge, in front of the CSO, in front of all their peers for something they can really be proud of.
Yes.
And for the people who really get this stuff, they are just like on fire with it, because they're like, oh my God, no one ever taught me this before. No one ever taught me this is the way the mind works. No one ever taught me that's why I'm being triggered. No one ever told me that, when I keep thinking that thought of everyone's out to get me, or I have to, get aggressive or whatever, or how to deal with if I ruminate on a problem or whatever, that there's a different way out. That's where SMART really comes in.
Right.
Using some of the tools like ABCs, the CBA, a number of, the recovery plan worksheet, a lot of those different things. We incorporate all those into the program.
Yeah, so they are practical tools there for everyone to use. A facilitator can help folks understand how to use them. And, it reminded me of something else. There's also not shaming. Besides not shaming, there's no labels. The addict, the
Right.
alcoholic, the person who's just having behavioral problems. It's seen as a person first and not a condition. And that is, I think, helpful for a lot of people. And for some people, the AA approach and a combination might be the thing. But boy, what a great opportunity for people to discover SMART who need more of an approach like SMART uses, science-based, evidence-based, and non-judgmental, non-labeled, in order to really, keeps their recovery journey strong and on track.
Right, exactly. Well, and then two of the things, this is pretty much the same concept, but two of the things that I really bring in are compassion and empathy. I try to empathize with all the people. I have, I think people are generally good, unlike some of the court services officers I've met that, people are trying to like trick and get away with things and stuff. I'm not saying all the court services officers are bad, but that, some people, because they've come up through kind of the police system, that sometimes there's a distrust for people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like people are doing the best that they can with what they know right now. And so what I try to do is try to extend empathy and compassion to every person that I meet. And so what I will do, I still set boundaries and things like that if things aren't working, but I can still be empathetic and compassionate. And what I try to teach people is to be compassionate and empathetic to yourself, and then compassionate and empathetic to all the people that you work with too. And I think those two words can bring so much understanding, release so much anger, let things kind of like let it go. Just let that go of, this old trauma. Just keep letting it go. And that's something that I try to bring in, because, a lot of people, they feel like they were mistreated or whatever. And then we might talk about, well, what were your mom and dad going through at the time? And then, there's like, oh my gosh, my life is the same as my mom and dad were going through back then, because a lot of that trauma, it repeats into the next generation. And they can say, oh my God, now I can see why my mom was so, why she was so uptight, why she was so anxious, why she was so angry, because the same feelings I feel. And I said, well, can you have compassion now for your mom and what she was going through? And she was trying to just do the best that she could. And so that kind of understanding really kind of helps the wound. It really kind of says, they didn't do it to me. They were just trying to do the best they could.
Right. So that's just an excellent summary and an excellent explanation of the compassion and empathy that can be coupled with or combined with the practical tools and the science-based kind of approach to cognitive behavioral. So what a powerful combination. And it sounds like you really are putting that forth to not only the drug courts, the CSOs, but the actual people who are going through the program. So I congratulate you. That just sounds so wonderful and powerful. As we wrap up here, Pete, tell me, just kind of wrapping it back around to you, where does your life go from here? Do you see yourself involved with SMART for a while, or what's going to happen for Pete Finger?
Well, the winters up here are pretty darn long and pretty cold. And so what I would like, I think what I would like to do is I'd like to get more involved in drug courts. I would like to, maybe after we start really perfecting our system here, maybe help other people get their, help other states get theirs going. We're also trying to work with the Native American reservations here too, because I don't know, you probably know that the reservations have terrible addiction issues, but the thing is that they don't a lot of times trust people from the outside. So I'm working with some people across the state. I don't want to say too much about it because we're trying to tread very carefully and do this the right way, because we don't want to violate anyone's trust. But I'd like to really be a part of the healing of the Native American system of trauma. And see, before I worked on this in this job, what I did was I worked on the suicide helpline. And so I learned a lot about what's going on in my state, what's going on. And, so there's a lot of listening. There's a lot of, people are calling in because they're anxious or they're depressed or whatever. And some are suicidal, but that we had a lot of calls from the reservation. And so I noticed that there was a lot of pain there, and and I think SMART and the life skills program. I mean, the book that I talked with Ron and Charles wrote, it's just an amazing book, and I think that could be so helpful in a lot of us that never learned the life skills the way we should have. And so I hope that this book becomes widely read, not only from people in recovery, but everyone that never learned the life skills. And, they're still maybe functioning, you're drinking, but they're functional, or their life isn't as good as it could be. But that this same work can be very, very powerful to help people find peace. So getting back to your original question before I went down the rabbit hole, I would like to continue doing my work on Zoom, but actually the COVID really worked for me because it forced me to put everything on Zoom. But now I can travel, I can go down south if I need to in the winter or whatever. That's where I really see me helping SMART, is helping in the drug courts and then helping meetings get started. I've been an organizer my whole life, and when I was working with our family company, I took it from $150,000 in sales up to I think over $3 million in a couple of years. And I opened up all these markets overseas, and that's kind of what I do. I kind of see opportunity, and I guess I'm the one. My dad always taught us, what do you say? Instead of asking permission, ask for forgiveness. And right. So I mean, that's what, like, I called the head of the drug court for the whole state. I mean,
Noreen, is that?
Yeah, Noreen Plumage. She's a wonderful person. And so I've been meeting all these people, and just calling them. And I mean, my dad always said, what can they do? They can't punch you in the face over the phone. The worst thing they can do
is
hang
Zoom,
up
or Zoom. Yeah. They can't come through the computer.
Exactly. All they can do is hang up on you. And so I've always kind of been like that, I guess a risk taker in business, to kind of uncover things and to ask questions that nobody else will ask. And it's like, I don't understand why this is the way that this is. And they're like, oh, well, we don't talk about that. So that's kind of my deal is Kevin will tell you I'm very Kevin Minnick, he oversees me and SMART, he'll say like, oh my God, he's so outspoken. And I am just kind of a person, I kind of say it the way that I see it. Yeah. And I don't mean to anybody, but I just see it, and then I try to change what I can so the system will work better.
Right. So that's directly applying some of those business experiences and successes into the area of recovery and being aware of things like thoughts and behaviors and how to change those. So I congratulate you. I'm very confident that you'll be successful in helping other people and other places develop drug courts and develop an effective kind of intervention like that with people and using SMART principles. So Pete Finger is a facilitator from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, a SMART facilitator. We've been talking with him. Pete, it's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time, and please take care and stay warm that winter up there in South Dakota, unless you do decide to go south.
Okay. If you need to contact me, I might be in Palm Springs. We'll find out.
Oh, okay. Then can I visit or just call you there? Is that
maybe both?
Yeah.
Maybe both.
Pete Finger, facilitator from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He is very much a person who has used SMART, who believes in SMART, who understands SMART. So thank you so much again, Pete, and take care.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the SMART Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Frazier. For more information about SMART Recovery, you can visit smartrecovery.org, where you'll find lots of things about meetings and principles and tools, and that the book Practical Life Skills that Pete mentioned a couple times. So until next time on the Smart Recovery Podcast, take care and stay connected.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. If you found today's episode helpful and inspiring, we encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear its messages. If you or someone you know needs addiction-related help, we encourage you to visit smartrecovery.org to find a wealth of digital resources, practical tools, and social supports meant to help you and your loved ones on their recovery journey. While there, you can search for a local SMART meeting near you, or join our online community to find 24/7 access to recovery help through regular online meetings and helpful message boards and forums. All of our meetings and online community resources are completely free of charge. Be sure to connect with us online to get more helpful addiction-related resources. Visit our website at smartrecovery.org, where you can search for local meetings, join our online community, subscribe to our e-newsletter, and find regular blogs, videos, podcasts, and more. You can also help us to spread our self-empowering, science-based messages to more people who need to hear from them in important ways. First, get trained on the Smart Recovery Program. If you are a licensed healthcare provider and could benefit from using Smart Recovery in your professional work, or if you are someone who would like to volunteer and lead Smart Recovery meetings in your community, please check out our training and volunteer opportunities at www.smartrecovery.org/training. Second, donate to support our work. Smart Recovery is a nonprofit that runs on the donations from generous supporters who understand the need for recovery-related support. If you would like to help us reach more people, consider donating to Smart Recovery at smartrecovery.org/donate. We'd like to thank US World Meds for their generous support of this episode. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Smart Recovery Podcast.